You're listening to Utter Radio, the University of Salford's speech-based radio station. Now it's time for a magazine programme created for the final project module on the BA TV and radio production. Produced by Molly Atkin and presented by Emma Nelson and Molly Atkin. This show explores the judicial system in the UK, both past and present, considering the help criminals are given during and after their sentences, called Crime and Consequences.
Live from the University of Salford.
You're listening to
Crime and Consequences
on Utter Radio.
Hello and welcome to Crime and Consequences, the show where we try and figure out the repercussions to people's actions. I'm Molly Atkin.
And I'm Emma Nelson. It's 1:15 on Wednesday the 1st of May, and for the next 45 minutes we're going to be discussing the criminal justice system in the UK and the consequences for those who break the law.
That's right, today's show will be focused on the reform and rehabilitation of criminals and what our country does to help them. We'll be hearing from Helen McGarry, who worked in the forensic care field, supporting those who were too vulnerable to go into prisons.
They'd go into a psychiatric hospital and it was about managing them, trying to find the right medication for them and obviously keeping them stable until a decision was made. Then they go to the panel and decide whether they were suitable to move back into the community or not.
Practicing lawyer Jessica Pratt explains how sentences are decided at trials and how prisoners can get them reduced.
These people aren't being reintegrated into society properly, and I think that's probably one of the biggest issues that we face in the UK.
I spoke to Yvonne Thomas, the chief executive of the Clink charity, about what they do to prepare people to leave prison.
The challenges that they went into prison with don't disappear when they're in prison. They're just waiting for them when they come out.
And we hear your responses to the question of the week.
On Utter Radio.
Crime and Consequences. Head to our website for your latest on crime.
www.utter-radio.co.uk/crime and consequences.
Now, we know in the UK that there are many different forms of punishments given to people who commit crimes, with the main form being sent to prison.
But what we want you to think about throughout our show is how ethical our judicial system actually really is. Is the government overusing prisons?
Do the conditions of prisons need to be improved?
Is the main focus on trying to reform and rehabilitate these people? Or is it just about punishing them, in the hopes that it might scare them against reoffending?
But first, it's time for...
Matt's Top 10.
It's Matthew Green with his Top 10, and this week he has picked out some of his favourite laws that are still in effect in the UK today.
You may think you're on the right path and staying on the right side of the law, but there are several dated laws still in place in the UK today that even you may have broken unknowingly. Here are my top 10 weird UK laws. Number 10. It is illegal to carry a wooden plank along the pavement. Under Section 54 of the good old Metropolitan Police Act of 1839, it is an offence for anyone to carry or wheel any ladder, plank, pole, showboard, or placard upon any footway, except for the purposes of loading or unloading any cart or carriage. This law was put into place to prevent public nuisance and to allow the public to move through footways. So next time you're leading a ladder up the street, consider driving it over walking it. In at number 9. Beached whales must be offered to the reigning monarch. On account of Prerogata Regis 1322, all whales and sturgeons found in the UK belong to the Crown. This law was created when King Edward II declared that the head and spermaceti of a whale should be given to the king, whilst the rest of the carcasses belonged to the finder. In 2004, the Queen was offered a sturgeon found off the coast of Wales, but she notified the finder she was happy for them to dispose of the fish as he saw fit. So next time you find a beached whale, make sure to offer it to the king first. Number 8. It is illegal to walk a cow down the street in daylight. According to the Metropolitan Streets Act of 1867, it is a crime to drive any cattle through the streets between 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. without permissions from a police commissioner. So, if you are wanting to walk your cows, make sure it's after 7 p.m. Otherwise, you could be liable to a penalty, not exceeding 10 shillings for each herd of cattle. In at number 7. It is illegal to bring Polish potatoes into England. The Polish Potatoes Order of 2004 means it is illegal for someone to import into England potatoes which are known to have been, or have reasonable cause to suspect, Polish potatoes being brought into the country. The law was introduced due to importers searching for European replacements after poor crop in the UK when there was a ring rot outbreak in Poland. And coming in at number 6. It is illegal to shake a carpet in the street. Section 60 of the Metropolitan Police Act 1839 states, "It is illegal for anyone to shake or beat any carpets, rugs or mats before 8 a.m. But don't worry, doormats are allowed to be shaken whenever. Sorry to say, but any early morning spring cleans must wait till after 8 a.m. if you want to give a dusty rug a little shakedown."
I can't believe there's a whole order just about Polish potatoes. Bit odd if you ask me.
I'm just worried about the next time I want to clean my rugs. Thanks, Matthew, for those weird laws. We'll be hearing the top 5 later in the show.
Crime and consequences.
On Utter Radio.
I wonder if I would have to go for trial for bringing a potato back from Poland.
I mean, I doubt it would be taken to trial, but I do find it interesting finding out sort of how people are sentenced and the crimes that they commit.
I agree. I'm always curious to find out what the sentence is and if they actually spend that long in jail.
Well, earlier this week, fourth-year law student at the University of Manchester, Jessica Pratt, came into the studios to speak to our judicial correspondent, Ben Tabner, about how sentencing works in the UK, and he first wanted to know what happens to someone between being charged with an offence and attending trial.
You're listening to
Crime and consequences.
On Utter Radio.
So typically they'll go on remand, and you can be held on remand for about 6 to 8 months, and you might be put on remand if you've been convicted of a crime in the past. The court thinks you might commit a crime before your hearing, and if you've been given bail and then not stuck to the terms, sometimes they'll give you house arrest and sometimes they'll give you remand. But I think one of the biggest issues at the moment is obviously we're dealing with overcrowding in prisons, and 15% of people in the prisons are people who are being held on remand.
There are different courts a case can go to depending on the severity of the crime committed. Who is it that decides whether a defendant is guilty?
So since this is about like the criminal division, you either look at the magistrates court, which doesn't have a jury, and it will usually be 2 to 3 magistrates and will have like a district judge. That's more sort of for minor offences. They can give fines and they can give sentences of up to 2 years. But your more serious crimes will go to the Crown Court, and that's where you have the jury. At that point, both sides will show their evidence, and then it's for the jury to decide whether they think that the person is guilty or not guilty.
Is there anything that can be done to reduce a sentence before it's decided in the courts?
So probably one of the most common things in the UK that we have is plea deals, quite similar to the plea bargaining that you see in the US. If you plead guilty at the first available opportunity, which is usually your first appearance at the court, you'll normally be given a third off of your sentence. But it can be extremely problematic because if you've got someone who's scared, who just wants to go back home to their family, you've got these people that could potentially be taking plea deals and getting criminal records when actually they might not have committed that crime.
What types of sentences can you get in a magistrate's court?
You can do community service, where you do unpaid work in your local community. Also things like having your driving licence revoked, and things like fines and maximum of 2 years sentence and revoking your driving licence, that's in the magistrates.
What types of sentences can you get in the Crown Courts?
There's house arrest, there's obviously the on licence being watched in the community, so you get early release from your parole board. You then put on licence. Sometimes they won't put you in a prison, they'll put you in a high security psychiatric unit.
Is there anything prisoners can do whilst they're serving time to reduce their sentence?
Obviously, the prison system is about rehabilitation, so if you can show that you have changed, you are for the better, then good behaviour is a really big one that can sometimes warrant an early release. And when you go in front of your parole board, what they're ultimately assessing is, are you a threat to the community? So if you can show them through good behaviour and the way that you act, then I think that's the only thing. It may not be a sentence reduction, probably the better wording for it would be an early release.
Do you think more needs to be done to help prisoners reintegrate back into society before and after they're released?
Oh, 100%. The government claim that they do all this support. They allow prisoners to get universal credit. The last 12 months of a prisoner's sentence is used trying to find them housing. But I think you need to consider the long-term implications of how that is going to affect them getting a job, how that is going to affect their mental health, and they might have lost family, they might no longer want to be associated with them. When they come out, they might have no one, and they've got no support, no secure housing, no secure job, and I just think the government isn't doing enough to truly rehabilitate those who have been imprisoned.
I think it's obvious. More needs to be done to help prisoners prepare for release back into society. Reoffending rates are sky high in the UK. Maybe we should take a leaf out of someone else's book to reduce crime and reoffending rates.
Thank you to fourth-year law student Jessica Pratt for that interesting insight into sentencing in the UK. Now, I think Ben is right about taking a leaf out of someone else's book, especially when it comes to the way we treat people who have committed crimes.
Definitely. I mean, statistics released by the UK government show that around 67% of people released from prison are reconvicted within a year of their release, compared to the much smaller of like 18% in Norway, and that's within 2 years of release.
They definitely have a bigger focus on rehabilitation rather than punishment. Maybe the UK should take notes.
They really should. But a lot of the ways that people are able to actually find the help is through charities and organisations rather than the government, and the Clink charity is a great example.
The Clink gives people confidence by teaching them new skills that they are able to use after release to find jobs and just lead a positive life, staying away from crime. Chief Executive of the Clink charity Yvonne Thomas spoke to us earlier.
My name's Yvonne Thomas. I'm the Chief Exec of the Clink charity, and that involves making sure that the charity has a sustainable future, that we stay close to our mission, which is to reduce reoffending and to help people at risk of offending from entering the criminal justice system.
Why was the Clink charity originally set up, and what is it that you do to help these people?
So we were set up 14 years ago, and it was an idea to train people in prisons to become professional chefs and professional waiters. And they did that by means of setting up a restaurant open to the public in Highdown Prison, which is in Sutton. The first one was set up by the prison service, but they quite quickly found that running effectively a commercial restaurant whilst trying to train was quite difficult to do, and therefore found a group of people who were really interested in rehabilitation. And so 3 individuals founded the Clink charity, raised the money to keep the Highdown restaurant going, and then opened Cardiff, Brixton and Style. Over the subsequent years, it was recognised that it's really important that people have very intensive support just before they leave prison and for a period of time afterwards. Therefore, the Clink developed an integrated model where we have professionals training people in prisons and a support worker, and then everyone who graduates from the Clink gets support for an unlimited period of time after release, because the challenges that they went into prison with don't disappear when they're in prison. They're just waiting for them when they come out.
Have you seen positive results with the people who go through the Clink in prison?
We have external independent research that compares our reoffending rates with those of effectively a control group population. and we reduced reoffending by about half. And about 60% of our students who qualify in the catering-related qualifications go into the industry, and about 40% go into some other form of work, but they're able to hold the jobs down because of the skills that they've learned.
Do you offer different types of qualifications, or is it all the same?
We encourage them, if they're in one of the restaurants, to qualify in both the kitchen and front of house, so they can do both qualifications. Typically they do an MVQ level 2, and we do professional cookery, front of house, production cookery, we do patisserie from our bakery. We also have 2 gardens where we grow produce, primarily for use in the restaurants, and they offer the MVQs in horticulture. So everything is certificated. Once they leave, if they are ready for work, we will help them find work. If they are not ready for work, we will support them through the things that they need to address in order to help them get there, and then we'll help them find work.
Other than by people attending the restaurants, how are you able to fundraise and make sure the Clink is able to keep going?
So there's a variety of things, but we traditionally haven't appealed to people who just want to make donations, because actually people in prison aren't usually at the top of people's lists. But I've always said, well, we do firmly believe that everyone deserves another chance. But also, if we can help people by doing what we do, it means that there is less reoffending. And if there's less reoffending, there are fewer victims. And it currently costs about £46,000 a year to keep someone in prison. So we're all paying for it. So there's an economic argument to help charities like the Clink. And there's also a social argument that it's actually in everyone's interests to do it, because it means that we have fewer victims.
That was the Chief Executive of the Clink charity, Yvonne Thomas, talking about the amazing work they do to help offenders. And they have had a very positive results, as Clink graduate Julian said in their 2024 promotional video.
Clink have always been there. It's like, for me, the support is immense. And now I'm working at Wagamama. I started as a line chef, and I'm now a junior sous chef. For me, life looks very different to maybe 4 years ago when I was attached to a crack pipe. It feels like I can support myself and the people I love most. And for me, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. That's, to me, what Clink really was.
The Clink graduate Julian there, you can hear more of his story on the Clink Charity 2024 YouTube video. And it's good to know that what they're doing has such a positive impact for so many people.
Yes, and if you wanted to visit a restaurant, head to their website, theclinkcharity.org, to book a table.
They also have lots of treats like brownies, desserts and cakes available for pre-ordering on the website, or you could go and get an afternoon tea at one of the restaurants. And when I went, they had these really cute little scones with jam and cream. They looked so good.
Ooh, I love a scone. I'll have to come with you next time to try one.
Definitely, it sounds like a plan. But it's just gone 1:30 and it's now time for the news and weather.
For your latest updates on worldwide and nationwide crime,
This is Crime and Consequences News
on Utter Radio.
In the Utter Radio newsroom, I'm Evie Capstick. Here's your latest stories. The victim at the heart of the Salford murder investigation has been named as 67-year-old Stuart Everett. Remains were uncovered over the weekend at Blackleach Reservoir, and Detective Superintendent Lewis Hughes spoke about the arrests they've made so far.
We have 2 suspects in custody. We believe we have the right individuals in custody, and officers are working round the clock to secure charges against them.
Police are confident these remains belong to the same victim as those found on April 4th at Kersaldale. 5 people have been hospitalised after a man with a sword attacked members of the public and police officers in North East London. A 36-year-old man has been arrested, and police aren't looking for further suspects. Donald Trump's hush money trial is still ongoing, with decisions expected to be made soon.
Judge Juan Merchan at some point soon will decide whether Donald Trump committed the crime of criminal contempt of court by violating the gag order that Judge Merchan issued.
His defence's tactics have mostly been downplaying Trump's actions of falsifying business records, whilst focusing on the fact that hush money payouts are not illegal. 2 men in their 30s have been charged with criminal damage to the treasured Northumbrian sycamore gap tree,
The famous landmark was a popular spot for photographers after its feature in the 1991 film Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. The tree was found to have been deliberately chopped down in September of last year, and the two offenders will appear at Newcastle Magistrates Court on the 15th of May. Now the latest forecast for Manchester.
Utter Radio weather.
This afternoon we will see sunny spells with scattered patches of rain possible at times. Clouds will thicken for the eastern areas by this evening, with clear spells further west. This is the Utter Radio newsroom at 13:34.
For your latest local crime news,
visit utter-radio/crime and consequences news.
That was Evie Capstick with the news and weather on Utter. It is 1:34, and if you've only just tuned in, this is Crime and Consequences.
We will be with you for another 25 minutes, and we'll be hearing from Dr. Christopher Tinmouth about the history of crime, as well as Claudia Lancashire on what is done to try and prevent young people from committing crimes.
You're listening to
Crime and Consequences.
Question of the Week.
Each week we ask you a different question, and you send in your voice notes answering our questions.
We love hearing from you and going through all of our messages to see what you have to say.
It's your opportunity to get involved, and who knows, maybe you'll hear yourself on the radio.
At the end of last week's show, we asked you,
if you could create a new law or change an existing law, what would it be and why?
And your responses came flooding in. Emily, 21 from Cheshire, sent this on Instagram.
If I was to change one of the laws, I'd say that people shouldn't have to go to college in the UK. I think there's quite a big culture around encouraging people to go from college to uni, and then it means that they miss out on learning apprenticeships and life skills that would support them financially instead of just having a degree. I reckon it would be great for young people to just get more experience in different life skills.
I do think it'd be more useful for people to learn life skills. And I think a lot of people aren't best fit for college or school environments.
Yeah, definitely. I also think that we should learn more about like actual life in school, like taxes and stuff. I can't say I've ever needed to work out like the circumference of a sphere or anything.
Yeah, neither, don't worry. So Tom, 24 from Guildford, replied on X and said,
one law I believe should be reinstated in the UK is capital punishment. I'm aware of how taboo the subject matter is, and how many people think it's quite abhorrent to send another person to the death. But I think that in extreme circumstances, intentional murder, child molestation, can't overlook how insignificant life in prison can be. And more severe actions really could be taken.
Capital punishment is like a very much debated topic, and there's lots of countries that still use it. But I'm not going to say too much, because if you keep tuning into the show every week, there's a chance you'll hear a little bit more about the death penalty.
Yes, I heard we may be covering it for a full show. So, we may want to hear from you again. Tom, to give us some more arguments for capital punishment.
Well, Alex, 46 from Beverley, sent this on our website.
If I could create a new law, it would be one that required all councils to spend the same amount of money on new cycling infrastructure as they do on roads. This would improve road safety by keeping motorised vehicles and cyclists separate.
Do you know, I quite like that law. I feel like it would encourage more people to like actually cycle to work.
Yeah, no, definitely. I feel like there's not many people that I see actually cycle very much anymore.
No.
So I think that will keep it safer
Get
as well.
your exercise in and do your bit for the environment.
Exactly, all positive. If I could get there safely by cycling, I could get my daily exercise in and do my bit as well.
Exactly. So be sure to follow us on X and Instagram at Utter Crime and Consequences to find out question of the week for our next show and send in your responses.
You're listening to
Crime and Consequences.
Question of the Week.
Now, we know how people get sentenced, but I wanted to find out what happens to those who are too vulnerable to like go into actual prisons.
Retired forensic care supporter worker Helen McGarry worked in mental health facility Caddlestones Hospital before working in a supported living service with people who couldn't go back to the public alone.
The people I work with are very complex needs. So they had mental health issues. Quite a lot of them had schizophrenia. Some of them had a learning disability and some were neurodiverse. Some were a combination of all those things. So they can't go to prisons, obviously, because they're too vulnerable to go into a prison. They'd be exploited. So what happens to these people essentially is they get sectioned In terms of when somebody goes to prison and they're given a sentence, there's no sentence as such given to these people. So the diversion panel look at the case and then they make the decisions. So they would go into a psychiatric hospital and essentially they would serve a sentence in there or until they were deemed to be well enough to come back out into the community again. In the late 90s, the government set up this initiative starting to privatise these hospitals. What they wanted was for these people to come back out into the community again, as long as they were obviously stable as well on medication, etc. So that's essentially what I did and what had happened with my service users.
What were the conditions like for the people within these institutions?
I think clearly because the hospitals, they weren't person-centred in the way that they practiced, and they were like prison environments, and to some degree as they should be because they've committed, serious offences. People aren't in physical cells, it's more like rooms, but they're still guarded. They are going to go straight in with restraint, both physical and caution them chemically as well. So not great places, and as I say, it was very institutionalised. People got up and had their breakfast at the same time, had the same meal as everyone else. There was no focusing on the individual or person-centred care or anything like that, which is obviously more what we are focused on, in our services.
From the time that they get institutionalised and then they're released, do they get to a point where the decision is made that they can go back into society? Is there conditions with that they have to meet?
So what happens with people that go into a hospital like Calderstone's, the one that I've worked with, they often go back into the community with what we call a community treatment order. So they can only go back into the community with certain conditions attached to them, because obviously it's keeping their condition stable and keeping them safe. The service that I manage is a supported living service, and it was a service for adults with forensic care needs. So when they come out of hospital, they don't go back home, they go into a supported living environment. They will all have guardianships as well, so they can't go out into the community without a support worker.
So obviously prison is about reform and rehabilitation. Would you say psychiatric hospitals are similar or more focused on helping that person?
All the civil rights are still taken from them, aren't they? They can't do the things that you and I can do. Obviously, they couldn't leave the hospital, for example. So there is a certain amount of punishment that's happening there for sure, isn't there? It's just they may need more support with that rehabilitation. So one of the guys I'm thinking of, he's got autism and he's got a mild learning disability, and he's committed a sex offence against a child. He's spent his time in Calderstone's hospital. He comes back out into the community again, and there are certain things that can be done. Now, usually, if there's still a high risk of them offending, they would potentially be chemically castrated. So they take medication for it. But then they have to live under an awful lot of supervision as well.
Is there a lot of assessments done, or is there a stage where they have to go through that diagnosis?
It's very hard sometimes to get a mental health diagnosis. It's not straightforward and it can take a long, long time. And unfortunately, it's actually quite hard to get sectioned. And especially if you've got a learning disability or a neurodiverse issue going on as well. And it costs about £9,000 a week to keep somebody in a psychiatric hospital on a secure unit. So it's a lot cheaper to put people in prison, and that's part of the problem. So what happens is people are allowed to stay out in the community and they're committing these offences. The police aren't charging them and they're getting sent up to hospital all this time, and then it's like, oh, no, it's behaviours. And it keeps happening until something really serious happens. And that's when they'll get admitted into hospital. So yeah, it's a frustrating system.
It's interesting, though, the differences of people who go to prison to those who go into mental health facilities.
It really is, and I feel like Helen McGarry was doing a job that I could never do, to be that sort of empathetic and understanding of the people who've committed some pretty horrific crimes. It takes a lot of compassion.
So in the UK, it costs around £90,000 a year to fund one person's keep in a high-security psychiatric hospital, compared to £48,000 a year to keep someone within a prison. There is a huge difference there, and I say that's definitely an incentive for people keeping out of these units.
Definitely, and that's a massive cost, but I think if these people, if they need help, then they need help, and they shouldn't be somewhere where they can be a danger to either the public or they'll be vulnerable themselves.
Yeah, I agree.
Crime and Consequences
on Utter Radio.
Earlier in the show, Matthew Green started his top 10 weird UK laws.
Here he is again with the final 5.
We're halfway through our list. Here are my top 10 weird UK laws. Number 5. It is illegal to be drunk while managing cattle. We're keeping the cattle theme going here, because under Section 12 of the Licensing Act 1872, it is illegal to be drunk whilst in charge on any highway or public place of any carriage, horse, cattle, or steam engine. This law was put into place to prevent any accidents from happening. So, don't drink and drive your cattle. And certainly, don't be drunk whilst driving the cattle down the street in daylight, or you could be committing 2 offences at the same time. Number 4. It is illegal to linger after a funeral. According to UK law, mourners are not allowed to overstay their welcome following the ceremony, and doing so could incur a fine. In 2015, a man stayed an extra 20 minutes after his wife's funeral and was charged £160 due to gravediggers having to work beyond their contracted hours. Number 3. It is illegal to handle salmon in suspicious circumstances. Section 23 of the Salmon Act 1986 makes it an offence to look suspicious while handling a fish. This act was brought in with the aim of stopping people illegally catching and selling fish on the black market. So next time you decide to pick up some salmon, make sure there's no fishy business. And number 2. It is illegal to fly a kite in a public space. Under Section 54 of the Metropolitan Police Act 1839, it is illegal to fly a kite on a warm summer's day in the park. The law was brought in to prevent common nuisances and danger to local passengers, and committing this heinous act could lead to a £500 fine. And finally, at number 1, it is illegal to be drunk in a pub or any licensed premises. Yes, I know that sounds really strange, doesn't it? But under Section 12 of the Licensing Act of 1872, every person found drunk on a highway or public place, whether a building or not, or any licensed premises, shall be liable to a penalty. An amendment to this act in 1988 extended this to all public places, including pubs and clubs. So next time your mate has had one too many and is getting rowdy at the pub, keep in mind he's actually breaking the law. That was your top 10 lists of silly laws.
I'm sorry, I don't understand how it's illegal to be drunk in a pub, but they still serve you alcohol. What a weird law.
Well, I'm just glad that I don't like fish. I don't have to worry about the way I'm handling it. Thanks,
Literally.
Matthew, for those weird UK laws.
It is 1:47 and Claudia Lancashire will be on the line soon to talk about keeping young people out of trouble with the police.
Follow us on Instagram and X at Utter Crime and Consequences.
Earlier in the week, I sent Molly on a little adventure to find out about the history of crime, and she was taken on a tour of an old prison by historian Dr. Christopher Tinmouth.
I am currently stood in the grounds of Lancaster Castle. To my right is the wing used as the first female-only penitentiary in 1821, and to my left is what has now been turned into a cafe since the prison's closure in 2011. I earlier went on a tour of the castle to see the prison cells and rooms still used in court cases today. I'm now joined by Dr. Christopher Tinmouth, who is taking me to a barrister preparation room, which is an area of the castle not even visited on the public tours of the castle.
The castle was originally constructed as a military fortress in 1093. It served a diversity of functions. It certainly served a military function, housing armoured knights. It served as a court, and it also served as a prison. So all 3 functions were inherent in the castle from the very beginning. The castle, at this moment in time, is still classified as a Crown Criminal Court. Typically, most criminal trials are heard in Preston, but nonetheless, the castle can be still used for higher level criminal trials should the cases reach it.
How did the prison evolve in terms of where the prisoners were? Were there different areas that were made for different types of prisoners?
The prison at Lancaster Castle has evolved over time to reflect different ideas as to what a prison should serve, what functions it performs for society and for the prisoners themselves, and also in response to the practicalities of housing different inmates within the confines of the castle. Prior to 1792, men and women shared the same cells together. Lancaster Castle was one of the early adopters of a system of separating men from women prisoners. This would be institutionalised by 1821. In Lancaster Castle in circa 1850, you had three categories of prisoners. Convict prisoners are the people who would be given sentences to serve in custody within a penal establishment, such as a prison. Remand prisoners were people who were held prior to being tried before the criminal court. The debtors' prisoners were ordinary people who, for one reason or another, could not pay their debts. John Howard is a very important figure in the history of prisons. They could either be sent to debtors' prison by prisons throughout England and Wales, creditors, across the world, or they could lecture them to adopt prison themselves. Good hygiene standards, separating prisoners one to each cell, men and women not in the same cells together, having good opportunities for exercise and meaningful recreation and work. John Howard would die himself, ironically, of typhus while inspecting a prison cell in Sevastopol in what is now the Crimean Peninsula.
What were the other sort of possible punishments that people may get for committing crimes?
Before the advent of Victorian prison reform, hangings were the ultimate form of punishment. In 1800, there were 220 crimes for which you could get hanged in this country. As well as the ultimate penalty of execution, you could be transported. From 1787 till 1868, it's estimated that over 3,000 people from across Lancashire were transported from the Crown Court. The law really did look very badly upon second-time offenders. We famously have a branding iron inside Lancaster Castle's Crown Court, which was used to brand a person on just below the left thumb to indicate that they'd committed a non-hangable offence. If they'd turned up in court and they swore an oath and the mark was visible, then the jury would know that person had reoffended.
What was the quality of the living conditions for the prisoners? How did that evolve over time?
In the 18th century, typically you would find conditions in prison to be quite unsanitary. There were regular outbreaks of diseases such as typhus and cholera well into the end of the 19th century. The 19th century prison did see a shift towards a more ordered and systematic approach to the prison. In other words, prison would no longer be just a place where people were held ad hoc until they were needed to be tried, but rather it should be an instrument of punishment and reform. The prison, as we know it today, was really reincarnated in 1955 as a modern Category C prison. This prison did experience its fair share of unsanitary conditions. We do have one place within the prison that advertises that we didn't have flushing toilets in every single prison until 1989. That was simply because of the restrictions of messing around with a Grade 1 listed building. In 2010, it received a national award for being the best run Category C prison in Britain. That was principally on the strength of its drugs rehabilitation programme. The prison closed eventually as a result of the decision taken in March 2011 to save on capital costs on the running of the prison estate at that very local level and to amalgamate the prisoners into more centrally managed prisons.
Sorry about that. I think there was a couple of technical issues with that last interview. But, I mean, I'm glad that the conditions in prisons nowadays have improved from the days of sort of cholera and typhus that he spoke about.
Yeah, me too. I think if I had to spend time in prison, it would definitely shock me into not reoffending.
Definitely. I mean, he was so knowledgeable, and I couldn't believe all the things he knew about. We spoke for almost an hour, so if you do want to hear more, head over to our website to hear the full uncut version.
On Utter Radio.
Crime and Consequences. Head to our website for your latest on crime.
www.utter-radio.co.uk/crime and consequences.
So now, here to talk about how you...
But just one moment. Chris was telling me about how the Victorians wanted to rehabilitate people and prevent them sort of from committing crimes with young people. So the Victorians would give a short, sharp shock treatment to make people, make young people spend a short amount of time in prison to try and scare them and stop them from committing any more crimes. But I mean, that was in the past. And here to talk about young people, how young people are helped today, is Youth Justice undergraduate Claudia Lancashire.
We recognise that young people who are at the start of their career
Claudia?
may not know what they want to do.
Yep.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you? You good?
Good, thank you.
Perfect. So, just wanted to obviously ask you sort of about your course. What is it that you do with youth justice, and what sort of things do you study?
So in justice, I'm in my second year now, so we've not covered the full basis. But so far I've done about safeguarding and working with young people, and obviously as practitioners, like what we can and what we can't do. I've learned a lot about custody and resettlement programs for young people as well, and then basically just like the reasonings behind obviously the committing crimes from young people, and basically just stuff like that really.
So what is it that's done to help people who have committed offences and then are wanting to rehabilitate?
So when they're released from custody, around 2 weeks after and like a few months before, they'll have regular meetings with probation officers and the youth offending team, and they'll basically just sort out a resettlement program for them. And basically this just needs to be like catered very specifically towards them, otherwise it's just not going to work and they'll end up reoffending and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, so earlier on in the show, Yvonne Thomas, the Clink charity chief executive, spoke to us about how they're helping people within prisons. But she also told me about a new training scheme that they're starting in London to help young people learn similar skills and provide them with more sort of opportunities for work. There's a
We
clip.
recognise that young people who are at the start of their career, they may not know what they want to do. So we've developed some short introductions. We want to hopefully get them to a place where they look forward to coming in for training, they look forward to coming in to work. And we can also offer them sessional work on our events, so we can actually give them the ability to earn some money as well, which is great.
So clearly the Clink are like helping young people by giving them working opportunities. Do you think that's a good thing, giving them like job opportunities?
Because obviously a lot of the young people have undiagnosed or diagnosed learning difficulties, which means that they can't like focus in classrooms and stuff. So I think practical work is always the best way to go, and helping them like have actual life experience rather than just algebra knowledge or something like that.
Yeah. So what other sort of preventative measures do we have for young people nowadays?
So usually you'll have early prevention services, which will work with kids in secondary school, and they'll notice like things such as like unauthorised attendances and drowsiness in class and stuff like that, and they'll go on to report as early as they can, just so we can get the correct services like social services, youth offending teams and stuff like that, just so we can basically target it at its earliest phase.
So is that why you think it's so important to sort of like help young people specifically? Why is it that you wanted to do youth justice rather than just like any sort of justice sort of course?
Yeah, because I think obviously childhood is such a short period, and then adulthood is like such a big like life period.
Yeah.
So I think obviously if they do something wrong in their young
that's all right. So
no,
like
sorry,
when they're
childhood.
do you think because obviously it's better to target them when they're young so that they're not doing it sort of in the future?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because obviously on their criminal records and stuff, that's going to affect massively how they go on in adulthood.
Yeah, so you've just finished your second year placement doing alternative provision. Can you tell us a bit more about that and what that is?
Like what you do with them?
Yeah, so an alternative provision is basically just a school which is a bit smaller than a mainstream school, where children with learning difficulties and disabilities will go, or even if they've committed offences before and stuff like that. It's just basically they'll be in smaller classes, they'll have mentors, and they'll be doing a lot more practical work. There's no pressure on them to be sat at a desk for 6 hours a day or whatever, but I think they should be considered more alternative provisions. Like, I really enjoyed my placement. I think it was really nice to like build relationships with children rather than having that kind of authoritative gap between them both.
Yeah, definitely. So is it about building like a relationship with young people? Because I feel like you've got to, with young people, you have to build a relationship with them so that they can actually trust you and what have you, don't you?
Yeah.
So what is it that you're wanting to do after you finish your course? Are you wanting to carry on with this?
Yeah, definitely. It's a very niche course, so I'd say I'd want to work with early prevention services because I think that's probably the most important part. And obviously, like, letting the young people know that they are recognised in society and stuff like that, because they just don't have faith in people like the police or even teachers.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Claudia, for talking with us. It's clearly important to help young people to get away from crime. It's been really nice speaking to you.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks, Claudia.
But unfortunately, that is all we have time for today.
Thanks for tuning in.
I've learnt some really interesting stuff from everyone that we've spoken to today. It's good to know that people are trying to help with rehabilitation, but I definitely do think there's room for improvement. And next week, we're going to be talking all things murder and how a murder trial works in the UK.
And we talked to true crime YouTuber Georgia Marie about how ethically true crime content is created and consumed.
Follow us on Instagram, X and Facebook and keep up to date to take part in the polls and send in your voice notes. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Live from the University of Salford.
You're listening to
Crime and Consequences
on Utter Radio.